day will be.
Daggers.
Shield! I will not be made a fool.
Can't do this just yet.
You shall be remade!
Hi guys, POE new here. So this is my league starter, Doryani's prototype crit Retaliation Gladiator. It works really well and is beyond my expectations. So what is Retaliation skill? It's a new skill type introduced in this league where you need to meet certain conditions for the skill to be usable. After you meet the condition, you will have a time window to use the skill. If you do not use that within the window, it expires and you need to trigger the condition again for it to be usable. If you use it, it will go to a cooldown. So to compensate for the strict condition for the skill, GGG gives it very generous high damage effectiveness and also really powerful skill tree for retaliation skills. Before we go into the details, let's take a look at the pros and cons so that you can decide whether you like it or not. So for the pros, so first, it has very high DPS. With my setup, I spend 25 divines and it reaches 30 to around 60 million DPS. And second, it's very tanky for most non-endgame bossing content, such as Simulacrum, which it is extremely good at. And also like juiced mappings, T17 mappings, expeditions, harvest, etc. In those content, it can have a very consistent 500k EHP. And third, it is actually not as clunky as we thought it would be before League start. And lastly, it's a totally new skill and new experience, new playstyle, and it's super fun. For the cons, so first of all, it cannot do Sanctum. So in Sanctum, you cannot block and you cannot enable your skills at all. And also it cannot do Legion because there's no enemy attacking you. And second, it feels bad for endgame bosses and Blight. So for endgame bosses, I'm referring to like Uber bosses like Uber Cyrus, Uber Shaper, etc. They do not have those frequent small hits. They either like attack less frequently and the skills hits really hard, which might one-shot you if you did not block. Thirdly, it's weak to lightning dot, which is the general drawback for Doryani's builds. But actually, according to my experience, it's not that noticeable. Most times you just one-shot those lightning dot rare monsters without noticing it. And lastly, this build has kind of strict requirement for some stats, so you need careful gearing for it. So if you are still good, let's move on. So first about its offense, like why it has so much damage. First is because of the Doryani's prototype and the flexion rings where you can easily get negative lightning resistance, which means that you can easily get 3 times more DPS with very minimum investment. Before this league, actually you need very heavy investment to hit the cap negative 200% lightning rest. But this league, you just need these rings and divine flash and that's it. Second reason is because of the skills itself. So this skills has very high added damage effectiveness. For Eviscerate, you can see it's 1300%, and you can hit twice for closed enemies, which means it can get around 2700%. And for Crushing Fist, you can get around 2200%, which is probably 5 times more or 6 times more than a normal melee skill. And third reason is that the Gladiator node has 50% chance after you use the skill, you can reuse it immediately. And you can have an additional 20% from the amulet anointment, so in total you have 70% chance to reuse. And also from the skill trees, you have 35% chance to enable another retaliation skill. So which means that in our setup, we were ping pong between these two. And it has a very high uptime. For example, if you block a hit to enable both skills, and then you can ping pong between two skills for like 8 times, 9 times, or even more than 10 times. It can happen. And also we were using Paradoxica for double damage, which is the best in slot. However, it does not have flat lightning damage where you need Shackle to provide the 30 plus level of added lightning support, which provides huge flat lightning damage. And also we can easily get 5 rages on hit from the Retaliation skill tree, where you can easily cap the 30 rage to get 30% more DPS. For the offense, so first of all we have the Lucky block Ascendancy node from Gladiator, which gives us 91% chance to block attack and 88% chance to block spell. And also we were using Divine Flash, where we have 50% of our elemental damage taken as chaos, and we have 80% chaos rest. We also fit in the endurance charges, which was buffed this league. So with 5 endurance charges, we have 20% reduced fizz hit taken and 20% elemental hit taken, which is really strong. And of course, we will have permanent fortify by supporting one of our retaliation skills with fortify support. And lastly, we have enemies deals 20% reduced damage, so 10% from the retaliation skill mastery and another 10% from the amulet. So that's about it, the offense and defense. But here are some important notes how to make the build work much better. So first of all, I'm using Vol Smite as one of the link, supported by duration. One reason is that it provides huge flat lightning damage. And second reason is that you can use it when retaliation skills are down, which makes your playstyle not clunky. Second trick I'm using is the self-cast molten shell, also supported with duration. So what it does is that you need it when your defenses are down. So for example, you have Fortify, you have Lucky Block, you have Endurance charges, but they all have downtime. So while mapping, if you're not involved in fight for a period, these buffs are all down and you're vulnerable to damage. So what you can do is that you can cast Molten Shell and then go into the fight until you have all the buffs back. The third note is that you can press Eviscerate and Crushing Fist buttons together while mapping. What I mean is that if you do not do this, so sometimes your Eviscerate is usable and sometimes only Crushing Fist is usable. And you have to look at the icon to know like which skill is usable, and then you decide which button to press, which is really bad experience. So what you can do is that you just press two buttons together so that whatever is usable will just be used. You do not need to worry about what is enabled or what is not. Of course, you can prioritize certain skills. So for example, in our setup, Eviscerate is our main skill. So we can prioritize it by pressing it slightly earlier than the Crushing Fist. So this is very important to reduce the clunkiness for mapping. And lastly, I do not recommend using Vengeful Cry, which is another retaliation skill that it will grant you a buff to regenerate the rage and prevent the rage from losing. And also it will add 25% maximum rage. The reason why I do not use it is because the 25 max rage is only 20% more DPS, but it is slow to cast, which means that it takes your attack time to get this 20% damage. So in total, you might not gain DPS at all. And second reason is that it also dilutes the chance for the ping pong. So remember here that we have 35% chance when you use a retaliation skill, you will enable another retaliation skill. But it's just another one. So right now we are ping pong between the two, where we can have very high uptime. But if you introduce a third one, then it will dilute the chance for the two attack retaliation skills to be usable, which will reduce your DPS potentially. And lastly, we have some Q&A sections. So first of all, is the playstyle clunky? My answer is no, or very slightly. The reason, as I mentioned, first is because it has very high uptime to use. Second reason is that we can use Smite when retaliation skills are down. And third is that we can press two buttons together, so we do not need to distinguish which button to press. Second question, is non-Doryani's version viable? The answer is yes. I started with the Fizz version using Paradoxica. I invested less than 10D budget, but the damage is much less. It's only 5 million. Next, about Paradoxica's mods. So for suffix, we must have the crit chance. For prefix, we prefer increased lightning damage. However, it is cheap because no one wanted, but because no one wanted, it is actually very hard to find one on the market. So either you check the market frequently or you unveil. Second choice is the elemental pen. This can be useful if you did not cap your negative lightning res to minus 200%. Next question, is shackle mandatory? Answer is no. So as a second best option, you can go thunderfist, which also provide level 30 added lightning support, and you have rare helmet. As another option, you can use rare gloves and replica abysses, which gives you a huge DPS boost, like 40 or 50% more DPS. But the downside is that it has 40% increased elemental damage taken. But for soft core, probably it's fine. But still, it's the third best option here. And for the budget, so I spent 25 divines, and the rings are the most costly parts, which cost 10 divines in total. So for the rings, you can either buy it from the market or make it yourself. At the time I bought those, it's cheaper to buy from the market, so you might check the market frequently. And last question, are there other gearing options? So for the amulet, instead of the eternal struggle, you can also go the lightning taken as fire or cold talisman, so that you take much less lightning damage from hit, not from the lightning dot. And for belt, you can also go Stygian or other eunuchs like Mage Blood if you are rich. So that's about it. If you have any questions, feel free to put it in the comment. I will also put the POB in the description. And at the end, I will just show you all the gears and gems and my skill trees. And see you next time.